Hello and welcome to Access to HE. We're starting a new unit, which is 282, the nature and context of business. And this is week one, where we're going to think about the nature, purpose, and functions of a business. Okay, so the objectives for this week, we're going to look at 1.1. We're going to compare some different types of business. Then we're going to summarize what the main purposes of the business are. And then 1.3, we're going to identify some of the key legislation which is relevant to business and its purpose. Of course, there's an awful lot of legislation that can be attached to a variety of different businesses. So we're just going to think of some of the key ones really that you need for your assignment. Okay, first of all, let's think about types of organisations. So a business is always owned by someone, obviously. It can be one people, it could be thousands. So it can have a number of different types of ownership, depending on what the owners want to do, what their aims and objectives are with the business. Most businesses do aim to make a profit, but that may not always be the major objective. So some charities function as a business and they aim not to make a profit, but to any surpluses they make will get ploughed um, back into the charity, and they wouldn't get paid out to shareholders. So there are different types of businesses. But in order, whatever you are, you need to make a profit or you need to make some surplus or you need to make some money in the long term so that you can plow it back because things always have to need to be redeveloped. People, may need pay rises, things like that. So you always have to make a little bit more than it costs to, it can't just be a 0-0 really. So the main types of organisations we're going to look at today are sole traders, partnerships, private limited companies, public limited companies, otherwise known as a PLC. You've probably heard that phrase. Cooperatives, not quite as common now as maybe they used to be many years ago. Franchises and the public sector. Okay, first of all, let's start to think about what a sole trader is. That's a business that's generally only owned by one person. It may be just yourself. You might be the owner and the employee, or you may have a couple of employees, tend not to be super large. You could have a team of about 8 or 9, something like that. It is one of the most common forms of ownerships of businesses, really. They often very successful because they tend to work within their means and they know their customers and they usually build up a sort of word of mouth reputation. Because they're very small, they can be sensitive to the needs of customers, so they can be fairly flexible and make changes or do something slightly different if one customer asks it. A lot of sole traders are people in the building trade, electricians, carpenters, bricklayers, or just small building companies, really. They're generally sole traders as well. Bathroom fitters, kitchen fitters, those sorts of things. And they're very much focused on the needs of the locality. So if there's, a particular liking for rebuilding houses in a certain way in a certain area, they will be in touch with that because they're very often local themselves. Some of the legal points that they do need to consider is they still need to keep proper business accounts. So even if it's just one person working for themselves, they do actually exist as a business. So they need to keep proper accounts for the Inland Revenue who collect their tax. And if necessary, those who are obliged to will keep VAT accounts as well. And they need to comply with all the sort of legal requirements to protecting the customer. So all the sort of consumer requirements would really apply to them, making sure that the goods are of a good standard, making sure their contracts are fair and equitable, not reneging on the contracts, not selling somebody something and overpricing it. So what are the advantages of being a sole trader? Well, it's your business. You're in total control of it. No one can tell you what to do. You make all the decisions. It's fairly cheap to start off. Quite a lot of people, especially if they're in the building trade, will maybe work with another company and slowly build their own business sort of on the side until they've picked up enough jobs to actually go out on their own. So in that sense, there can be quite a secure way of doing it. So it's cheap to start up. You generally just need the tools of your trade. And most people have that, whether they work for themselves or work for other companies anyway. The other advantage is that any profits you do make are yours to keep and do as you wish with. You have no shareholders to answer to. The disadvantages of being sole trader is if you do need to raise finances, say you want to, investment in a very large piece of equipment or something like that, or you want to expand and sort of create an office, because you're doing very well and you need more people or someone to organise, then you might need to raise some finance, and it is harder to raise some finance as a sole trader because you're considered sort of slightly less secure. Also, one of the biggest issues is unlimited liability. You are liable for everything you do, really. There are some insurances that you can have, but if you make a mistake, you will be liable for the effect of that. And if it causes damage to someone's property, or worse still, kills somebody, then you will be liable for everything that happens. So, unlimited liability is very important. We always have to be aware of it. Unlimited, it means that it can cost you anything. And there is no limitation on what they can go after. So if you go bankrupt, say, and you have lots of debts to your suppliers, if you have unlimited liability as a sole trader, if you cannot pay off your creditors, then you may have to sell your house, you may have to sell your car to pay off your debts. So just bear that in mind. So to feel a little bit more secure, some people go into partnership where maybe there's two or three of them building a business. Say those who again building a business company, a building company, they might have three different skills and they might create a partnership to give themselves a little bit more security. Or some certain businesses like lawyers, solicitors, accountants often function as a partnership, and that way they get an office between them and they can pass work to each other, and it works quite well. So how does this work? Well, it's normally set up using a deed of partnership, and it contains how much capital each partner will provide. So what are you putting into the business? Are each of you putting in 20,000, whatever. You also, in your deed, agree how the profits or losses should be divided. So it's all worked out ahead of time. You also agree on how many votes you have, and that's usually based on a proportion of the capital. So if all of you are putting in an equal amount, you'll have equal amounts of votes. If one of you is putting in 50% of the capital and there's another three of you putting in, adding up to the other 50%, well, that person with 50% will have more votes than the others. And that sort of seems fair, really, in a way. Your deed would also tell you sort of the do's and don'ts of what you've agreed to do if you want to expand, take on a new partner, or what process you're going to go through if one of your partners wants to leave, or if you want to bring your partnership to an end. All of that needs to be covered in your deed of partnership, and it all needs to be sorted out before you actually start functioning together. As I said, partnerships are very common with solicitors, private doctors, accountants, that sort of thing. What are the advantages of being in a partnership? The risk gets spread, really. You've got people to support you with some decision making, but also if something goes wrong with one of the decisions, then all 4 or 5 of you will sort of share the risk. And that reduces the burden of debt, really. Although it doesn't mean to say you won't have debt, it just reduces it because it's shared out. A new partner can bring more money and resources to the business. They might have different skills and ideas which can complement the work, or it can expand the area that you work in. Again, if you're a team of solicitors and one of you specialises in, say, divorce law, another one specialises in criminal law, another one might specialise in company law, then you can cover quite a lot of the legal requirements, maybe in your local town, so you can become a bit of a go-to partnership, really, because people can come to you with anything, and there's always someone with that extra experience. When there's a few of you, there's, some people who are looking to buy your services, they may see you more credible as a partnership than just with a sole trader. It's a sort of psychological thing, really, because you're all set up. You might have a nice office, and there's a few of you all working with your certificates. They might feel you sort of more trustworthy than someone who just works on their own from home or something like that. You know, it's a bit image, really. It's not necessarily true. But what are the disadvantages of the partnership? Well, if you make profits and do well in one of your cases, you have to share with the others. So the individual has less control of the business, and the sole trader makes decisions about the direction they're going to go. There's no one for them to argue with. Whereas the partnership, you've all got to come to an agreement. And if there's something you really, really want to do as a partner, and maybe the others are a bit risk averse, that could be quite frustrating. However, if there are any problems, it's a problem shared as well. Okay, so what's a limited company then? Now, we often hear about limited companies. I mean, and there's two types of limited company. There's a private limited company and a public limited company. We're going to go and talk a little bit about those. But first of all, generally, what is a limited company? It's a business that's owned by shareholders. So there's lots of different shareholders, people who have invested in the company. They may not work actively in the company. There may be someone who lives miles away but has some money invested in it. It's usually run by a board of directors. If it's a small limited company, it may only be 2 or 3 directors. If it's a big one, it can have a board of 10 or 12. And a lot of these directors may also be shareholders. In fact, especially if it's a small company, they often are. Most importantly, liability is limited. It's a legal sort of loophole, which is a lot why people, even if they're very small, become limited companies. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a bit. But to set up a limited company, you have to register. In the UK, you have to register with Companies House. It's a place where all limited companies are registered. You get a certificate of incorporation and a memorandum of association, which talks about what the company has been formed to do. If I wanted to look up your company and you're registered with Companies House, that is open to the public. So we can find out a little bit about you, can find out how long you've been together, who the directors are, etc. There's a lot of information available, which some people find very useful. Controls of a limited company, well, the shareholders own the company actually, not the people who work for it. But directors are employed to control the management, as I said. Directors are responsible to the shareholders, and the shareholders will take votes on any major decisions. There's usually an annual general meeting, unless something particularly unusual comes along, and then the shareholders will probably be contacted, usually by mail or email, and then be asked to vote on something. You have a duty in a limited company, or the directors do, to act in the best interest of shareholders all the time. And this is generally good for them because the shareholders will invest more into the money if they believe you're acting in their. Sometimes one of the issues is that the shareholders take precedence over looking after the staff or even to the quality of the product sometimes. And that is unfortunate. And, we've read about things like this where, a big pharmaceutical company is making a mess of something, but the shareholders are still getting paid. So those of you who are in the UK who know that there's big issues about the utilities companies here at the moment because they are not spending enough money. Say the water company is not spending enough money cleaning up spillages and overflows, and so people's water is not as good as it could be, and the beaches are starting to suffer, but the shareholders are getting paid. When really, I think most of the country believes that the shareholders should go without their profits sometime to make sure that things are being done. And because the water companies have left it a long time when they've pandered to the shareholders and not to the general public who are their customers, um, they're now in a very difficult situation. But I still believe that personally, I believe the shareholders need to swallow it sometimes. Whenever people take shares out in a company, they're very much told that, when things are going well, you should get profits. And when things are not going so well, you will get less profits, or maybe one year no profits. But it's very difficult to give no profits to shareholders. They don't tolerate it very well. They often, if you get 2 or 3 years like that, then they'll take their money out. So the executives have to walk a fine line. However, there is, of late, there's been far too much of the shareholders' needs being put before the customer. But it should be a balance. Okay, so limited liability, very important about having limited liability. If you bring anything away from this, know the difference between unlimited liability and limited liability. Limited liability means that those shareholders can only lose the money they've invested. They can't lose any more money. So if I invested £20,000 into the water company, I will only ever lose £20,000. Okay. And this encourages people to invest. So they know, it says, yeah, only your investment. You will not, if something terrible happens and then they get hit with fines of 3 million or something like that. Well, I, as a shareholder, won't have to pay those fines. It will have to come out of the profits. Or it might come out of you not doing something to improve it for the customers that you had money put aside for. Okay. So those who have a claim against a company, they can only recover money from the existing assets of the business as well. So I can't ask people to sell their houses to fund me back if I am a supplier that hasn't been paid. So that's another thing. So the shareholders are protected, their personal assets are protected, and the amount of money they've invested, the amount of money they'd have to pay out is protected. So being a shareholder is not too bad, really. Think about it. So what's the difference then between a public limited company and a private limited company? You probably hear these all the time, really. Public limited companies are generally known as PLCs. You probably hear that. A lot of the big banks are PLCs. And they are floated on the stock exchange, which means that any member of the general public, if they have the money, can buy shares in them. So quite a lot of our utilities are PLCs, banks are PLCs, various things like that. Quite a lot of shops are PLCs. Private limited companies are a little bit different in that these shares are not available to the general public. They don't have to float on the stock exchange. They don't have to tell you a lot of information about it. They are often a smaller company, but they can also be very, very rich companies as well. Private limited companies tend to often be family run. You might find that one of the most common things is them being family run, and therefore they don't want shares from outside because they sort of want to keep all the decisions within the family. Originally some of the great fashion houses were private limited companies. A lot of them now have turned, because they've been swallowed up by sort of bigger companies like Louis Vuitton is a massive company because it's about four companies rolled into one. So they buy up a lot of the famous fashion houses. But Hermes, those of you who know about handbags, Hermes, the handbag shop, remained a private limited company. I think it still is, and it's very much run by the family. Uh, Gucci used to be as well, but I don't think it is now. I think it's bought by a bigger company and is now a public limited company. BMW used to be a private limited company. There's been so much movement between the car companies nowadays, it's very hard to know. But as far as I know, it was always a private limited company. You could have a look, you can look that up now and see what the status of it is. And it was actually run by, again, members of one family for a very long time, based in Bavaria in Germany. Um, Hence the BMW. Okay, so look up and see if you can find those. Check out if BMW is still private. So why do we keep it public? Because they don't want the general public involved. They want to keep it. So it could be a small group of friends. It could be a family. Like I said, very often it is a family. Okay. So why does a private company choose to become a PLC? Well, maybe they decide they want to expand and get much, much bigger. So they do want to offer their shares for sale to the public. So therefore, they need to become a PLC. If you don't, it restricts how you get money in, basically, because if you open it to a wider group, you can get a lot more financing. If you are a PLC, it's easier to raise money for others from banks, um, because they know that you're available for all sorts wider investments. They like that idea, including themselves. Sometimes they may well invest themselves. You don't necessarily have to float on the stock exchange, but most do. And when you float, that means there's a lot more information about the organisation is available to the public. What are the disadvantages of becoming a PLC? It's quite expensive because there's a very drawn out legal process that's got to be done. Lots of financial information needs to be documented and made available. Several years of accounts needs to be shown. And that means your competitors, when you're actually going through the process, it's one time when your competitors can see a lot of your financial information, as well as your customers, the people who buy from you regularly. And some people might feel a bit uncomfortable about that, and that might be part of their decision to go or not to go. Shareholders in public company do expect a steady stream of income, because you're talking about a big company, which is generally quite secure. So they do expect to be regularly, and that's the trouble. That's what I was saying about some of our utilities, because because the shareholders have grown to expect it. They started creating a stink when they were talking about maybe not giving them so many profits because they had to fix all this stuff that hadn't been invested in. Um, but they don't like it, you see. They've got used to it. And when people get used to things, they don't like to go back. So what's flotation? It's when shares in the PLC, it's the first time they're offered to sale for the general public. So you only ever float once. And the company is given a listing on the stock exchange. So in the UK, it's the British Stock Exchange. There are other stock exchanges, NASDAQs, the New York Stock Exchange, the Tokyo Stock Exchange in Japan. No, those are the ones that tend to sort of really count, and then obviously the American one. It's the opportunity to company when you float the first time. That's when you can really raise a lot of funds. People start getting interested in you because your flotation is announced, and it will be on Bloomberg TV, and there'll be lots of hoo-ha about it. But it is a complex and expensive process, and it can take teams in a company. It could take them a year to actually get everything together to actually prepare for a flotation. Depends how big you are, really. What are shares? Some of you may well know, some of you may have some. Shares is something that normally pays dividends, which is usually paid sort of annually when the company sees how much money's been spent, how much profit has been made, and they will usually pay some sort of dividend on that profit, depending on how many shares you've got. So if you've got 5 shares, you'll get 5 shares worth of profit. If I've got 25,000 shares, I'm going to get a lot more profit than you are. So they usually pay dividends twice a year, definitely annually. The stock exchange ones pay it twice. Over time, the values of shares can increase, or they can also go down. Okay, so you can sell shares at any time. Generally, people sell shares when they're doing well, when they've made a bit of money on them. So that you can buy a share at £1.50, say, and if you can sell it at £3 each share, then you've not only have you gathered some profits over the years, but when you actually make the sale, you make a bit of money as well. If you have enough shares, you can influence the management of the company. If you've got about 48% of the shares, you're very influential. So there are some organisations you might know about called venture capitalists, and they've got a sort of funny role in the business world because all they do is sort of buy and sell shares into companies, slowly sort of growing their shares until they get a large part of control of the company, and then they can drive the company to do things that possibly the company didn't want to do, really. And it's venture capitalists are the ones that buy up all the shares in small companies. And like I say, if they can get themselves to about 80% of the shares of the company, they can really call the shots then. I said here insist on choosing some of the directors, but it's venture capitalists that also will close a company and just sell all its assets off if they think that's a better deal. All they're doing is looking for the best deal. So they're not really that concerned with the company, with the product, with the people, anything. So they are to be treated with caution, really. Yes, they can bring a lot of money, but if they get into the power position, they can take your company away from underneath you and destroy it, really. And you'll have no say in it. So it's just something to be thinking about. So what are the risks faced by shareholders? Well, a reduction in the dividend, not paying well because performance has been bad for a few years, or no dividend at all. If the value of the share falls below the price that you paid for it, you have to make a decision to sell them at a loss or to hang on to them and hope that the value will come up again. It depends, really. And to do that, you've got to be tracking and sort of knowing is your company something that nobody's buying anymore, and if so, get rid of them. Or is it's just had a bit of a funny dip because you're in the hospitality industry and money's been scarce, so people aren't going out so much to eat and various things like that. So you've got to really look at it, and that's why a lot of people employ a stockbroker to look at the shares for them, because maybe they don't have all the knowledge to make those decisions where guys who are extremely experienced do. The other risk is obviously if the company fails completely, and then you will lose the money that you've invested. And again, at the present time, after COVID, quite a lot of fairly secure little companies, I'm afraid, went bankrupt just because that 2 years really made it impossible for them to trade. So some people would have lost a fair bit of money there. Okay, cooperatives. We don't see so many cooperatives now. Many years ago, they're much more of a thing. They do still exist in certain areas, and in some sort of forward-thinking people are actually starting to go back to them as well, which is interesting. 3 main types of co-ops, really. Retail co-ops, like shops or supermarkets that are cooperative. Marketing or trading co-ops, it's usually farms, vegetables, milk, wine in France. A lot of the wineries in France are cooperatives where they all get together in an area, because if they're all small wine producers, they can't really sort of manage on their own doing all the marketing and the selling. So they get together as co-ops. So say like 5 small vineyards will become a co-op, and they will have one bottling plant that works for all of them and one marketing strategy for all of them. And it's very, very efficient, and it's something the French have been doing for very many years with their wines. And other wine producing countries are sort of following that ideal. But the French have been doing it for hundreds of years, so good for them, really. Farmers may get together, and you get sort of farmers markets coming out where people can bring all their trade together, but they also can do it more formally as a cooperative as well. And things like workers' cooperatives, where people get together, to maybe, especially a company that's failed, it's people have been known because they've got the skills to get together and try and keep it running by all the workers being part of it. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, because the difficulty is they often don't have big cash for investments, but it has been known to keep some things together. I do remember one of the great sort of British motorcycles. If anyone's into motorbikes, Triumph was a big motorcycle that worked, came out of the Midlands, and it'd been around for many years, had a great reputation, still does really. But it went bust somehow. Bad management, I guess. I don't know. A lot of competition from Japanese bikes, which were way, way cheaper. But they kept it going for quite a long time as a workers' cooperative. So the Triumph label sort of stayed around, into the sort of 60s, 70s, 80s, I think, as a workers' cooperative, when really it probably would have gone in the 60s, had they not kept it going. Eventually, I believe the label was bought by one of the bigger motorcycle companies. So they still exist, and you still see them, but they're no longer a workers' cooperative, because it was almost impossible for them to raise money to invest for development. So yes, they could keep making the bikes that they knew about, but you need to spend quite a lot of money for research and development, especially something like automotive industry, which is always developing, always changing. The bikes have got to go faster, they've got to be heavier, they've got to be more economic, they've got to be more versatile, these sorts of things. Some examples I hear of cooperative retail societies. In the UK, we have a supermarket literally called the Co-op, and that's a cooperative where everybody who shops in there has a card because they're a member. Um, and you used to get dividends. I don't know what you get now. You get sort of money off, and you get sort of vouchers and things like that. But years ago, when my mother was in it, she used to get a little payout at Christmas time, when the co-op divvy was paid out. In the same way, she was a shareholder of the co-op, in the same way that she could have been a shareholder of somewhere bigger. Um, John Lewis, that some of you may know, one of the big London department stores, John Lewis, is in fact a cooperative. It is run and owned by its members. That means the staff. And it's huge, and it's swanky, and it's always worked that way. Again, when times are good, the staff get very nice Christmas bonuses, and I think they get another bonus in the summer as well. And if times aren't so well, they don't. I mean, they all get paid, but the bonuses go up and down. But every decision that's get taken in John Lewis should be voted on by members, and that's every member of the staff. I think once you've been there about 6 months, you get full voting rights, you get your bonus rights, and they have very good working terms and conditions. So if you want to work in retail in the UK, and you like department stores, John Lewis is one of the ones to go for. Food's very good as well. Okay, so farmers cooperatives, like I mentioned, farmers, winemakers, cheesemakers, those sorts of things. Small business credit unions, they're little savings groups, People often save up for Christmas. They have a credit union. People put in money on a weekly basis. So it's a cooperative savings plan because it creates a lot of money that can be invested, a bit like a sort of pension or a savings scheme. So they make a little bit of money. So you put in less than you get out in a way, as well, as long as they've invested it well. Artist cooperatives sharing the studios, that's fairly practical. That's quite common. Studio and exhibition facilities where groups of young artists maybe get together, and so they pay for the studio between them. So, and the same, there's all sorts of issues. They come to agreements about how they buy and sell their pictures as well. And local pubs. Now, this may surprise you. Pubs, you think, well, surely aren't they just owned by somebody or owned by a brewery? But there's been quite a spate of local pubs that are very much the heart of a village community, particularly in the village rather than in the city. And local pubs, the thought of losing the local pub, which is the place where the whole village gets together, is a real problem. Now, pubs are suffering a lot in the UK because of the high costs of running them. And some of them have gone out of business, especially if they're independent. They're not attached to a brewer. They're attached to one of the bigger breweries. They usually, can sort of help to ride out the hard times. But if it's an independent one, some people just sell up and give up. So what's happened is, again, the community have got together and decided to own their local pub. And now it's become so popular, there's actually a pack that you can get telling you everything that you have to do from the local authority. And it tells you, what to do, how to do it. And often you're probably somewhere in the village, there's a solicitor who will do it all for free as well. So people give of their time freely to keep their pub running. So you'll have different people behind the bar, people doing the cleaning, people doing the building. Everyone will bring their own skills and they'll run it. And it will be put down as a not-for-profit, so that all the profits will go into the business, but make sure that some little bit of salary is paid to people. But a lot of people do it. People who are retired will join in and help, so they've got a lot of free time. And some people will just do it for love, really. So they may go to work every day and then they'll go and work a few evenings in the bar and things like that. It's become quite effective. Okay, franchises. This is a growing business style. I would say that 20 years ago in the UK, it was not very common at all. It was much more common. It really developed in the US, but we sort of picked it up eventually. It's a business who sells the rights to another business to operate a franchise. So they may run a number of their own businesses, but they don't want to run them all. So they sell a franchise, which it allows someone to take their image and their product and run with it, really. Started off many, many years ago with things like Avon, the door-to-door selling of makeup. But now it's very popular with fast food restaurants and things like that. So normally the franchisee needs a fair bit of money to make an investment. I said about 10 to 50,000 here. That's a general average of what we come across, really. They need that to set up the business, and they pay for it. So say I'm McDonald's and I'm selling you a franchise. You have to buy the franchise off me, and then you pay a proportion of your profits every month or every quarter to me as well, for the honour of being a McDonald's. Okay. So depending on the type of business, the franchisor. So again, if I'm McDonald's, I will provide training. I will give some management expertise, and you will be part of my marketing campaign. So when you see the national campaign for McDonald's, it's for all McDonald's. And you may also supply the raw materials, which McDonald's actually do. Not all of the food ones do, but McDonald's do. So I've given you an example of some of the top 20, I think, franchises in the UK, and you can see that even though this is the UK, the majority of them are still American because it is very much an American idea and comes from them. So like McDonald's, Starbucks, um, Pizza Hut, these are all franchises. Subway, Papa John's. I mean, mostly American. But we have got some of our own now. We have Costa Coffee in the UK. That's about the only food I can think of. Most of them are American. Okay. Um, so yeah, franchises interesting. Take a lot of money. McDonald's is probably renowned for being one of the best organized of franchises, but there's a lot. We've got a few smaller ones in the UK, like chicken shops and things like that. So they are mostly fast food. But I've got a couple of others here. Cleaning services like Molly Maid, that's Canadian, but Molly Maid is quite big in the UK as well. So you can start off, but you have to meet the Molly Maid standards, and all the staff have to be trained in a certain way to do it in a certain way. Gyms are another franchise, and again they have to have the right ethos, and operate certain classes that you can get everywhere so that people know there's a set standard. It's about, with a franchise, it's about maintaining a certain standard really, but there's usually a room to be a bit flexible too. But like KFC is KFC. You need to know that wherever you go in the world you eat a KFC and you know what you're eating. So in that sense, well, the advantages of franchising, it's a tried and tested marketplace. They've been around for years. Usually the company you buy are massive. They're usually international. So they've usually got a solid customer base and you're just slotting into it really. It's a lot easier to raise money from a bank to buy a franchise than opening your own chicken shop. If you're opening a KFC, you're going to get more money because they know the bank feels that KFC is more solid. People eat it. They know. They can find statistics on it. You tend to be given all the right equipment, and there's usually a training manual that goes with it. You have national advertising as well, which is of something way out of most people's sort of league. And it's a tried and tested business model. They wouldn't be franchising it if it hadn't been going for years and was already incredibly successful. What are the disadvantages to you, the franchisee? It's quite expensive to buy into one, and you always having to give some of your profits. So if you're a McDonald's franchisee, they take a fair bit of your profits forever. You have to follow the franchise model, so you can't sort of go off on your own and do totally different recipes. That would be a big no-no, really. You can do some specials though. Some of them will allow that, but I think you have to sort of get it all checked out with them first. Why has franchising become quite popular? It's well, from the company's point of view, it's a way of rapid expansion that they don't have to do anything about. Quite honestly, they say it is the stuff, off you go. Really, it provides a huge amount of finance for them because you've got that initial investment, so that hasn't cost them anything to give you the equipment, and then they get a bit of your profits all the time. Quite honestly, for doing very little. A local entrepreneur sees it as a good idea because it's a small business but with a reduced risk because it's a well-known name. As I said, it brings its reputation. And banks like this combination. They like the small business. So they like to be seen to be supporting small businesses, but they also quite like the security of the big company. So everybody's happy, really. That's why they're popular. Okay, lastly, the public sector. Every country has a public sector, some larger than others. They provide essential services that aren't really provided by the private sector. And they're meant to avoid duplication of resources. They're meant to prevent exploiting customers. They shouldn't really be doing that sort of thing. The sort of things in the UK public sector is the NHS, government departments, our public schools, police forces, fire brigades, public transportation system, so like the buses, the tubes, the military. In the UK, we have the BBC, which is a public broadcasting company. Some of you in other countries may have your own network broadcasting companies. And utilities companies, very often, a lot of countries, their utility companies are in the public sector. And mostly they are funded with government money. Okay, so we're moving on now to the next bit. We're going to look at purpose. What is the purpose of a business? Okay, so why do we start a business, really? Well, there's quite a few reasons. To either make a good, to provide a service, or to distribute products, or to benefit society, or to fill a gap in the market. So I've given you a few examples here. So to make a goods, I'll tell you in a minute about the difference between goods and services. Goods are, excuse me, tangible items that you can make and you can store and use. So business will make a good and sell them to the customer. So here, a good is like bottles of Coca-Cola, bars of Cadbury's chocolate, loaves of bread. Okay. A service is something more intangible. It can't be stored. It happens now. And you provide service to your customers who just have access to them for a period of time. So it will be something like hotel, going to a restaurant, going to a hairdresser, a nail bar, those sorts of things. So you provide a service and use it. There will be other services that will go on a bit longer, say like your mobile phone service or your broadband service. But it isn't something you can really touch. It's just something that, is doing a certain thing for you. So distribute products at supermarkets, getting the products that you like, getting them, being a place where people can come in and get them, or delivering them to you if that's necessary. Benefit society, charities, social enterprises may be set up for certain issues, creating a charitable service. It could be a fundraising for research. It could be setting up day centres, websites with information, counselling services, all those sorts of things, really. And to fulfill a gap in the market. Why do we start a business? Well, if I'm in a little village and there isn't a hairdresser and I'm a skilled hairdresser, maybe I've just moved down from the city, I would think about opening a hair salon in the village, or if I don't have enough money, maybe doing mobile hairdressing, or maybe start off functioning from my house until I can afford a salon. But I'd be filling a gap in the market, and the amount of people who want to get their hair cut would make me think about, can I get bigger? That's really it about what a business is for. But what I have done is I've done a little bit of guided study time here for you. So I think before you go on to the rest of the week's video, I would stop and have a little bit, have a little think about what you've heard, really. I've got two handouts for you, should be in your resource section. Why start a business? And John Handy's The Purpose of Business. So really make yourself familiar with that, because you might find that useful for your assignment. And also have a little look at the video about Yap the carpenter. I've put the link in here, but the link will also be on your resources, so you can plop into it at any time. Just watch Yap, and he's talking about setting up his business, why he set up his, what was the motivation. And he's obviously he's a carpenter, so he's a sole trader. So maybe reflect on sort of, him being a sole trader while he talks about what he does, really. So take a bit of time out to do that. Take a break, maybe from the video, and then you can come back to it when we look, because we're going to be looking at legislation in the next section. So if you just want to sort of take a break, give your head a refresh or come back to it at another time, please do. Okay. Welcome back. We're going to look at legislation now. Let's think about legislation in business. Legislation is really a set of laws that put in place by government to protect businesses themselves and to protect the customers of businesses and to protect the staff and employees as well. And all businesses in the country have to operate within these laws to ensure that everybody is fair and safely treated. If you don't comply with legislation, there will be some sort of legal action, and there will be restrictions. It could even be an imprisonment if you do something terrible, really. So legislation has outcomes, really, failing to follow legislation, and there are ways that these things are checked as well. So what are the different types of legislation that are really important to think about in business? We've got employment law, we've got consumer law, and intellectual property laws. Employment law really thinks about keeping employees safe. Consumer law is about protecting those who buy things or use them. And intellectual property is about protecting ideas. So let's start thinking about employment law. So it's any piece of government legislation that's designed to protect your employees. And it covers quite an area, really. There's some legislation around recruitment, the process, how you must do it, what you can and what you can't do, and what responsibilities you have once you've made a job offer. One of the main things it identifies that you need to have a contract of employment. So the recruitment processes, they need to be fair. They need to provide all applicants with a fair chance of getting the job role. So you need to think about the language and where you advertise. New employers, as I said, must have a contract of employment, and you have to have that within 2 months of starting the role. Otherwise, it's a breach. And the contract needs to cover how much you're going to get paid, what holidays there's going to be, exactly what your duties are. Sometimes there's some hazy areas where you say anything else that's required because sometimes you can't remember everything. But it's got to, have some specifics. What responsibilities you have, what things you must do, what things you must not do. What the notice period is it 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 1 week? And any additional terms of employment that's relevant to the job. The next part we need to think about is pay. And there's legislation that covers pay. It doesn't cover exact amount numbers, but it covers about how it should work, really. And there are minimum wages. So the legislation really focuses about what the minimum wage is. And minimum wages in the UK, there are differences for different age groups, well, especially young people. So you need to be aware of that as well to make yourself sure. So under the National Minimum Wage Act, all businesses must pay a minimum hourly rate. There is no exemption. And the aim really is to keep people's living standards up to a certain level. And the rates are set every year by the government, and they can be reviewed. When the government's got a bit of money, they will raise the minimum wage, hopefully. Or it should be raised if the cost of living goes up, but they do what they can. For people aged 16 to 24, the national minimum wage is actually lower for youngsters. Now there's a bit of an issue about whether whether that's fair or not, but that is the way it is. And there's different categories within that, like 16 to 20, 21 to 22, and those who are doing apprenticeships as well. So once you get to age 23 or over, it becomes the living wage. So there is a limit to how low that can be. Okay. So, working conditions. Employees must be provided with safe working conditions and an ideal working environment, or the best as they can do, really. Um, they must be also be protected against unfair dismissal. So you've got the health and safety aspects of working conditions, and you've got the unfair dismissal aspect. So working conditions, there's loads of legislations around health and safety that you could probably go and do some looking at yourself, really. There's issues about desks being a certain height, chairs being adjustable so that people don't injure themselves over years as they sit. We have to take responsibility for making it unsafe. Lighting, temperature, heating, all those sorts of things. There's very, very clear boundaries for. Health and safety policies really relate to the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974, which is huge. So, and it's really, there's issues about drinking water and making sure there are trained first aiders and first aid equipment. If you're a large factory that manufactures heavy goods, they will have a lot more health and safety legislation relevant to them than, say, you're a small office that's, just like an accountant's office or something like that. It's a huge difference, really. But the legislation is relevant to all. The other part of the working conditions is about protecting employees from unfair dismissal. And it looks at the reason that employees are sort of pushed into leaving a business. An employer must only lose their job for a good reason or because they decide to leave. An employee can be terminated from their role for severe misconduct, or they can be made redundant if a business needs to cut its costs. However, if there's no reasoning for one or the other, then they may be able to take the business to court. So again, a lot of this should be reflected in people's contracts. But if you are unsure, you can look up unfair dismissal and you can find out a little bit more about it if you want to. Um, the Working Time Directive, this is sort of slightly more recent. It came out in 1998 and it was amended again in 2003. And it places limits on the amount of hours you can be expected to work. Now, this will differ through different jobs. They can only be asked to work on average, an average employee can only be asked to work on average up to about 48 hours a week. And they are entitled to a minimum of 5.6 weeks holiday pay per year, holidays. But that usually includes the bank holidays as well, of I think, which in the UK we have about 11. They have to have a minimum of 1 day off each week. And they have to have at least 11 consecutive hours off in every 24-hour period. And you have to have at least a 20-minute break after working 6 hours. Now, some companies will give more breaks than that, but that is the minimum that they have to do. So anything more than that is something that the company has chosen to do as well. Okay. If you are a lorry driver, they have quite complex working time directive now, or a delivery guy. Anyone who's behind a wheel for a long period of time, they have to have frequency of breaks. And in fact, most lorry drivers now, their vehicles have got controls on them that actually stop people driving more than a certain time. So they literally have to find somewhere to stop. They usually have like somewhere within an hour where they can, even if they have to just pull over in the back of a garage or something like that. But they normally have to calculate that into their route and their driving, because they have a meter that shows, and if they go over that, they could lose their license eventually. So it's got to be considered. There are some people who don't meet the working time directive because of the jobs they have. And you might find police, nurses, doctors, the working time directive doesn't actually apply to them. Now, what is tried to do is the hospital tries to meet it wherever it can, but they do have an exemption because they do tend to work longer shifts than is required for the working time directives. And they do also sometimes have to cover, maybe if someone's sick, they have to come in and cover. So they might not always be able to have the time off where they should. So unfortunately, they do have an exemption, and sometimes that is abused, I can assure you, having worked in the field. So it's particularly emergency services and NHS that have exemptions, but there will be other jobs. Things like prison guards will probably have working time directives exemptions. The army will have working time directives. It means that, yes, they might have been going off on leave, but something's happened and they're being called back. So they don't have their 1 day off when they should have. It's the same with the police all the time. It happens a lot. But they are supposed to get it back in time. So, and it's really because they have the sort of jobs that you can't just go off and leave. Okay, so it's difficult. Why do we have the working time directive? Well, it's got its pros and cons, but most people like it. They think it's a good idea. The idea is to improve the quality of life between people have more leisure and less work, and also to stop companies exploiting workers so they actually have some family time. Now, this, of course, was brought around with a lot of work over many years by the unions. And, finally took a long time to actually get this put into law. It provides an incentive for firms to invest in productivity, because if you've got people working sort of slightly shorter hours or with a limited amount of hours, they tend to be more productive. You often find they may be working long hours, but in the later hours, they're not as productive as they could be. Some of the cons is, well, it costs businesses a lot more. They often have to put more, have a bigger staff team than they would want. It can affect flexibility, which can be a problem for seasonal businesses. So sometimes certain seasonal businesses can have limitations, so that, they work longer hours between, say you work in the seaside, you work longer hours in a pub, say in June, July, and August, whereas they have more time off, and that might be something. It's got to all be agreed, though. Really, many professions get unpaid overtime, as I said, such as doctors or nurses. They don't tend to get that much overtime paid. They usually end up hanging on because someone couldn't get there in time to take over the shift, and so that the working time directive doesn't help them. But on the other hand, it does help quite a lot of people. So, Okay, let's look at consumer rights. Consumer rights talks about consumer law, which is about legislation designed to protect consumers from poor quality products, really, and poor business practices. So there's quite a few bits of legislation. The Consumer Protection Act and the Trade Descriptions Act. The Trade Descriptions Act's quite old now, but still very popular. The whole idea is to ensure that businesses don't follow misleading advertising practices, and actually represent things to the consumers properly, and they don't lie to you. So everything that they say should be accurate and decent and legal. So the 2015 Act deals with transactions between a seller and a buyer. It covers the quality of the product. It covers the process of return. There's got to be some fair process of return, which should be advertised somewhere. It might be on your receipt. It might be in the shop somewhere. It should cover repairs and replacements. When does it happen? How does it happen? What can get repaired? And it should cover how things are delivered to you. As I said earlier, goods and services must be described accurately and it must not be misleading. Please note my graphic here. It should be fit for purpose. So you can take things back if they are not able to do what they are supposedly designed to do. They must be of a satisfactory quality. So you cannot sell something that's damaged or faulty or cracks in it or bits falling off when you're actually selling them as new. If you are selling something as an old, refurbished, or damaged product at a lower price, so that is okay. So, say I go to buy the newest Samsung phone, and it comes to me, and it's a brand new one, it only came out last week, say, and it comes to me with a big crack across the screen. That's not acceptable, and that is a breach of the Act. So consumers must always be given the right to return, replace, or have a repair for any goods that are faulty. So it doesn't matter what they write on your returns thing. If it is a faulty good, they still have to act. Okay, so to keep that in mind, because sometimes they might argue with you and say, well, you've only got 30 days to bring this up. And say you've got it as a Christmas present and it's, you know, there's a wire missing or something. You go, well, sorry, it doesn't work. So it doesn't matter how long it is. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Consumer law. So the other part of the law, 1987, is to make sure that all things are safe. So yes, it's got to meet its description. You cannot sell any damaged or so even if you're selling a refurbished phone, it cannot be unsafe. It can't, burn your ear if you go to use it or something like that. Um, so if you've got a trademark on it, anywhere in the European Union, it's illegal to sell an unsafe product. And it gives you a right to claim, and they would have to claim on their insurance. If you hurt your ears because I don't know, your phone went on fire, then you would be able to claim damages. But there is a bit of an issue with people with these e-scooters that, although they say they're following the instructions, there's been a bit of a spate of them when people charge them overnight. That some of some of them have been bursting into flames and that, and causing people's houses to nearly burn down. Now, you'd have to prove liability. But if you've done what the instructions tell you to do, then there is something faulty in the equipment. And it doesn't matter how old it is, really, in that sense, unless you've tinkered with it, they are responsible. The Trade Descriptions Act's been around since 1968, very popularly used. It's about businesses having to accurately describe their goods and services. So it's an offence for businesses to falsely describe any element of the products they offer. So my example here is, someone who describes your car as a 2-litre engine when in fact it's an 1100. And when you buy it, you hang on a minute, why doesn't this car go very fast? And you take it to the guy, he's going, no, yeah, it's not a 2-litre engine, that's only an 1100 or a 1200 engine. So that's a direct lie. So that is a breach against the Trade Descriptions Act, and they will be held and penalised for that. As you can see, I've got some nice, lovely Chanel handbags here for you, or designer handbags of some sort. And fake designer goods, which is a massive industry at the moment, mainly coming out of China or Turkey, that are marketed as genuine are a clear breach of the Trade Descriptions Act. I mean, it's up to you to make a decision on them, really. Certainly, I go to places, I won't tell you where they are, certain countries where they have certain markets where these fake designer goods are there. But they don't say they're real. They don't say this is a real Chanel handbag, this is a real Louis Vuitton handbag. They say, good quality fakes. So that's in your hands whether you buy them or not. I would suggest you don't buy the ones in the picture because they can't even spell Chanel. So that's really bad. But there are quite a lot that look very good, and I believe the choice is yours. But I have known that some countries are actually trying to clamp down on those. But I'm not sure what they can do, because the Trade Descriptions Act in the UK says only if they market it as genuine. So if they go round to you, if you go into a street market and they're saying, yep, all these handbags, these are real Chanel handbags, here you are, 20 quid, real Chanel handbag. Well, then I think you're a fool for going for that. But they could be done. But if they're saying, look, these are copies, these are fake, I mean, if you like it, buy it, then I really don't think they're in breach of the law. But I do know that in Europe they are trying to do something about that. So we shall see. Other bits of consumer law, intellectual property, which is something that's not that tangible, but it could be people stealing or copying other people's work. Think about, when you're doing your assignments, and, think about plagiarism, that's stealing someone's intellectual property. So it is an issue. If I take something, I usually put references, unless I've changed all the wording. So it's basically, anyone who's written a great piece of research really wants people to recognise it as theirs, and they want to make their money from it. Copyright is similar. It's about, say, like music, books, videos. They tend to be covered by copyright, and some of them are subject to copyright without permission is illegal. It depends. If copyright laws are quite complicated, so if when you go on to Google Images, I was able to take this one, there was no copyright on it, but there may be other ones when I look through Google Images to put something on a slide for you that says, copyright protected, do not use, and I can't use them. This one was available, and a lot of people make it available for people to copy, which is fine. In fact, more people do now than don't. But if they do say don't copy, then please be aware of that and do it. Patent is something more unusual. It's really about an invention or a new process. So say you're a scientist, you created a new vaccine, you need to follow the patent process on it pretty quick, because up until the time you do file a patent, anyone can sort of pinch the idea from you and use it, and that's just your bad luck, really. So once you've patented something, say a new vaccine, then for a set number of years, it's very often 20, 30 years, you can only you can have the sole rights to any financial gains from it. But then afterwards, patents all have a life, because eventually, because science is science and people work out how to do it anyway. So eventually, after the years, when the patent is up, everyone can produce it and make money from it. That's just the way it is. Trademark, these are protected. Some of them are ridiculous. Some of these logos, you probably recognize nearly all of them. They're all trademarked. You cannot use them without their permission. You can use them in something like I've done here, because I'm talking about Amazon, I'm talking about Disney, so I can use them in a sense, but I can't use them as my own product. Now, some of you might think, well, goodness me, look at Chanel, look at JP Morgan. They're just letterheads. They're just certain types of font, and I agree. I think it's a bit iffy to patent things like that. And there's been all sorts of lawsuits about people who've created something, and someone says it's too much like my trademark, and it is getting a little bit out of hand. McDonald's are particularly aggressive. Anyone copying anything that looks like their M, or even they were trying to actually own the colour, that's debatable, but I don't think they've won that argument, but they certainly have gone for it. IKEA is interesting because it's the blue and yellow, and of course it's the flag of Ukraine, which we see a lot, because of the Ukraine war. Fortunately, IKEA is sort of fairly cool, and they haven't protested about it, but they could. because it's Swedish and then the colours are the same. Anyway, some can, some can't. I wouldn't mess about with Coca-Colas, and I wouldn't mess about with Nike ticks either, because they would come down on you pretty heavy. Okay, so these are, as I said, they are logos that are definitely trademarked, and if you misuse them or misuse them, they can start a lawsuit. Okay, so it's pretty much the end of this week's one. Sorry it was such a long one. But what I would like you to do for your guided study is to do a bit of reading on legislation in business. But I would focus on employment law, because I think that's what the assignment would probably like to hear about the most, because you have to talk a little bit about the law, and I would focus on employment law, okay? Because you're only going to have so many words. You can't write about all the different types of legislation. But okay, so do a bit of reading on that. Just be confident with employment law, because you will need it in other units anyway, because we've got a unit on recruitment coming up. Okay, thank you for that, and I will see you next week.